Welcome back, everybody. What you're looking at is my logo being cut out of 3/8 steel on my new fast cut plasma cutting table. And there you can see that thick 3/8 steel. I took delivery of my new fast cut plasma cut table in April. Here is the trucker. It came from Western Canada. I got it on April 2nd, just before the tariffs kicked in. And I was in need of a new plasma table, as some of you know. I asked Torchmate, and they weren't interested in providing me with a new table, so I was on my own to go buy one. And I recently saw in Christian Sosa's shop in Vegas, he had this G8 table, which is what made me want to go and get one of these tables. And so here it is. We temporarily parked it in my shop here in town, which has become more of a storage unit. And then a couple days later, I was able to move it over to the shop in the backyard. I needed to make some space for it because it was bigger. My previous table was 4x4. Now I have a 4x8. And here I am moving it in. And in my interstitials are my kitties, but this is my very first project of the 10 projects I'm going to show you. It took some time to learn how to use the machine, of course, and the best way to do that is to experiment. And here I'm making what are harness hooks for the horse barn in the back. And I'm cutting it out of 1/4-inch plate. I make my files in Illustrator, and the 1/4-inch plate cuts nice and easy. This runs on a Hypertherm 85 is what I'm running on this machine. And the Hypertherm has great tips. You just change out the tips, and in the tips are all the information that the machine needs. So the tips just unscrew, whether it's a 45 amp tip or a 65 amp tip or an 85 amp tip. I think here I'm running a 45 amp tip. The files that I use, I start with in Illustrator, then I bring them into SheetCam. And in SheetCam, you tell it the thickness and the type of material that you're cutting, and then it denotes which tip you should use, and then it sets all the feed rate and all the cutting amperage and such on the machine automatically. Again, you just screw in the tip and all that stuff is sent right to the machine. Learning SheetCam is definitely a little bit of a learning curve coming from a different system, but like I said, the most important thing is experimentation. And here I'm making these harness hooks. I cut them out and I weld them together with my Lincoln welder, and I just hit them with some spray paint. And then I thought they would be a nice look in the horse barn. These are things I buy at antique shops all the time or at flea markets, but I could never find 4 or 5 of them that are the same. So I was like, you know what, let me make them. They're about 8 inches long, so they're pretty sturdy and hardy to hang on extension cords, and lots of leather and tools and stuff I can hang on them. And that's precisely why I wanted to make them out of the 1/4-inch thick stuff. And here you see them in the shop. And then there you go. Some of the projects are super fast and simple. While I was working on the harness hooks, I made 2 shelf brackets. And here you see them. I just whipped them up in Illustrator, and then I brought them into SheetCam, set the cut paths, and then after I took them over to the welding table. And on the back, I welded a 1.5-inch by 1/8-inch strip across the top and the back. That gave me some screw bosses, drilled some holes through them. I was able to mount it to the wall and also to the bottom of the shelf, as you can see. As I experiment, I think of all the different home projects that I need. So, of course, I had to make the MakerMan logo, and this was a bit of a challenge. Obviously, this is an old saw blade. So how do I center my graphic on an old saw blade? Usually the X, Y, and Z, or the coordinates, is usually a square corner of the shape, and this is round, so somewhere out in space is that 0 that I have to create. And so what I did is I made one file that was the perfect circle with the circle hole of the saw blade. And then I positioned that file. All it had was the outside line and the hole in the middle of the saw. And I made sure that I did an air cut right over the hole in the middle of the saw. And then I swapped out that cut path for the cut path of the image. So I was able to center it using that hole right in the middle, right there over his left shoulder. I don't know if that makes sense, but there it is. MakerMan. I have several sheets of this. It's about 10 gauge. It is thick tooling steel in sheets. And the sheets are about 8 feet by about 40 inches. And they were from the Stanley Tool Factory somewhere in Massachusetts that went out of business. And a friend of mine who's a junk collector happened to find a truckload of these sheets. I have about 15 of them. And he said that they were for making framing squares. And I had them for a really long time. And so finally I said, let me try and make a set of legs out of them. What I realized one time, though, is I tried to bend them and it breaks because it's tooling steel. So once I cut out my shape, I have to use a torch to get the metal to bend. And that's why I'm heating up just those little tabs. And by bending those tabs, I'm able to make my table corner of my table leg. And I don't cut any holes typically with the plasma table because it gives you a sloppy little round hole that you can't adjust because the plasma table will harden any of the steel that it cuts near. It gets this really weird hardening thing. And so here I am putting my first leg on the table. You see, this is just a concept. I've been thinking about the style. I'm not sure if I'm in love with the style. An industrial style kind of looks like girders. But sometimes you got to just make something just to see what it looks like to get a reference. That's what I always say. Get a reference, and then once you have the reference, you could change it later. It was simple enough to make, and I have a lot of these sheets. I got to come up with like a triangle or a square or something to cut out of them. And there's a table. Simple table. You don't need a plasma table to make those type of legs. You could just make them with an angle grinder, maybe. Everybody needs a house number, and it's nice to have a house number with a little memorable imagery connected to it. I've always loved the Tin Man. A few years ago I used this image for something, but it did not have my house number on it, so I made one with my house number so the UPS guys will know it's me. And I welded some legs to that logo at the bottom there, to the little square that holds the numbers. I welded some rebar about 2 feet long and hammered it into the ground. So chances are, maybe during the snow plowing times it might get bent over, but then I'll just plasma cut another one or fix it. But there it is. Now my neighbors know it's me. And if you drive by, you'll know it's me too. Just don't come a knocking. For this project, I wanted to try something interesting. I wanted to draw something and show you how I could draw something quick and simple with a black marker and then turn it into a cut path. And I start here with just a piece of paper and some Sharpies, white and black, to go back and forth. I bring that photographic image into Illustrator, outline it in Illustrator, and then I fix up the jagged edge by deleting some pixels and some points, and now I have a cut path. And I take that cut path into SheetCam, and then I bring it into the machine, and then I set the cut. And I'm cutting 3/8 inch steel, 3/8 inch mild steel, and it's a simple cut. And then I take that image and I just weld a little bracket to the back of it, and I bolt it onto my new tow truck. This is another new project. If you're on Patreon, you've seen this project. This is a 1984 GMC. If you're like me, you need 40 hammers within arm's reach at any given moment. It seems like every time I hit something, I need a different hammer. So what I'm making is a hammer rack to hang on my new Fireball table. Fireball welding table has the 3/4 inch holes, and that's actually the Fireball plasma table tool. That's for scraping off the slag on the back of the parts. That's what I've been using the whole video. And in this design, I have this one leg sticking out on both ends that I torch up and bend into position. Those are going to hold these little collars, and these collars are to accept the pegs. If you've seen a welding table, it's a series of holes, and these pegs are holding the fixtures in place. In this case, you'll be able to move your hammer rack around if you have. If you want to clean the table off for a particular job setup, and you want to get rid of everything, you could take the hammer rack completely off. It's obviously not permanent, or you could move it around, or you can plasma cut 3 of them. So on 3 sides of the table, you could have hammer racks. Or also tool racks. They aren't necessarily just for hammers, they're for hanging stuff on. And so this is my addition to my Fireball table. And here you go, after my crummy paint job. And now I can have every flea market hammer I've ever owned. Love it. And also any kind of tool you want to stick in there. And there you go. A collection of 10 things made on my plasma table would not be complete without my big Bugs Bunny butcher knife. Boy, that's a tongue twister. My big Bugs Bunny butcher knife. I designed this style of knife a long time ago, and in that video I cut this out of a saw blade that was laying in the yard. Now I can cut multiples, and here this is the knife that I made a few years ago, all sharpened up, but with that particular style you could make yourself one. I was selling the blanks on my website. I have to check and see if there's any available. Now, anybody with a plasma table knows that they can make Blacksmith tongs. And in this case, you see me making up 2 sets of Blacksmith tongs. Now, I just wanted to make something I can grab stuff off the plasma table with. I could always go in and change the shape of the end of these patterns so that I could blacksmith them into whatever grabby shape I need. But in this case, I just simply made them little pinchers. I have to drill a hole. The hole gets a 1/2-inch peg. And instead of firing up the blacksmith shop today, I just went in, grabbed my plasma torch, because this doesn't require too much work to get it into a pair of functional tongs. I heat up and mushroom up the peg, which is going to be the pivot or the rivet, and then just to offset the jaws a little bit, I blacksmith them and offset them quickly on my Harbor Freight anvil. This is like my desktop anvil. I find I use it probably more than any of my other anvils because it's always right there on top of the weld table. And there it is. This design I whipped up on Illustrator, and you only need to make one side and just replicate it twice. And there's 2 pairs. And what I didn't realize until I'm looking at it right now is that I made them opposite. So the dominant piece on both of them is in opposite sides. No big deal. And another simple project you can make on your plasma table is a series of paperweights. It is a common project to make on your plasma table is a paperweight. And here you can see the paperweights I'm making is out of the leftover scrap from all the previous projects. And what's nice is once you have a repeat design, you could just keep going and going and going and selling all your paperweights to your friends and family. I hope you enjoyed this 10 projects on the plasma table video. Thank you for watching. My patrons get a chance to see some of this stuff early on and some of my behind the scene projects. And thank you to all my kitties that made appearances today. And thank you to everybody that watched this far along. Please like, subscribe, and share my videos. And you can find me on Patreon, and some stuff is available on my website still. Thank you all very, very, very much. And thank you, Fast Cut. I appreciate this. Thank you, Fast Cut. Go buy a Fast Cut table today.